Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Maartje.
And we like World War II media and we want to talk about it.
Editing Maartje here. This episode contains mentions of sexual assault. We start talking about it at the 48-minute mark and finish talking about it at the 51-minute mark. If you would rather skip it, please do, but I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. It's a good one.
Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This is going to be part 2 of our Generation War episodes. And we are picking up in the middle of part 2, the second episode. And we are lucky enough to have our guest Anna back with us.
Hello there.
Welcome back.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good.
That's great, because we are very deep in the trenches in Russia right now.
Yes, literally and metaphorically.
So, guys, let's just get back into episode 2.
Should I continue on where we left off? So that would be with Greta, I think.
Yes.
So Greta, our very prominent star of the music scene, has actually been sent on a little tour at the Eastern Front, and she's supposed to sing to the soldiers at the front and maybe raise their morale a bit. And she is exposed there actually to the horrors of the war for the first time. When she's actually left behind by the flight she was meant to take home, because the Russians are advancing and she's in the middle of battle and she is too busy packing up her things and the flight can't wait, and then she gets left behind and she has to help in the field hospital where she is faced with absolute horrors that she has never seen before, and that's really her first glimpse into what war is really like, because so far she's only been at home in Berlin, singing her voice, singing her heart out, having a good time, and now she's confronted with the not so nice side of what's actually going on.
Yeah.
I can tell that I'm still not a fan of Greta.
One thing that I liked was when she performs, she's wearing this beautiful red dress. And we know from an earlier scene where her and Victor it was like a misconnection. They never got a chance to say goodbye. And so when he came to say goodbye to her and missed her, he left her this beautiful dress that he had made because he was at Taylor. And so she's wearing this dress when she performs. And I really liked that sort of emotional beat there.
Yeah, so she still has a part of Victor with him that was actually quite beautiful. Yeah, I can admit to that.
Still, I agree with you, Anna. I despise this character. I really do not like her. And to be honest, I don't really know why Victor likes her. They don't have a whole lot in common and they don't really talk. They just make out.
I mean, we don't know how long they've been together before everything. Maybe they've been childhood sweethearts since they were 6 or something, when everything was still fine. Yeah, I don't think we can really judge their relationship, but she's a difficult character to like.
And just before she gets thrown into the hospital life, our 4 friends, with the exception of Victor, actually meet up in her dressing room, and they have a little, I want to say celebration, but it turns sour fairly quickly because we've not mentioned this at all. Charlotte is a huge crush on Wilhelm, and they've not told each other, and they're both being idiots about it. Greta wants them all to celebrate and to have a good time, and everybody just wants to leave.
Actually, I don't think they want to leave as much as they just can't stand this superficial everything is fine situation, because there's Greta in her glamorous little backstage area, and she's just super fancy, not just in looks but also in her spirit, and everything's gonna be fine, and it's so nice to be here and to see you. And then there's Charlotte, Wilhelm and Friedhelm, who are absolutely done with everything. They are dirty, they've seen war firsthand, they've been in the trenches, and then they see Greta and she's still so high in spirits and she just doesn't know what they know. Yeah. And then when she leaves, there's just no reason for them to stay in this really nice surroundings, even though Friedhelm tries to make them stay and tries to give them this little reunion.
Yeah. They have all grown up, and Greta's still a little girl. She's not made the step yet to be an adult.
Absolutely. She's still the naive little girl that she was in the beginning, and everyone else has just grown up, like you said, and they've seen real life.
Yeah. I think worth mentioning too is, when Greta's at the hospital, her and Charlotta have a conversation where like Charlotta expresses regret about reporting Lilia, the Jewish doctor. And I thought it was, I definitely saw some criticism about this because people were saying, well, soft pedaling the fascism angle. It's like even the people who do terrible things immediately regret it and question what they did and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit offline. It's like we were saying before, our main characters are being set up as purely victims of the war and of the circumstances that they are in. And they don't really have to live with the awful things they do because they get to regret them and move on from them immediately, almost.
And they get to regret them immediately, like you said. It's like, oh, yeah, I've done something bad, but I'm so sorry for that right now. And you don't really see their evolving mindset. And that's really sad that they just didn't address that in the series, because that is very interesting to see how these horrible things that they have to see and endure can change their mindset and their outlook on what is happening.
And it's not like these actors couldn't do it because they are great. They're great actors.
They definitely could have done that, this introspective, like, what are we actually doing? Why are we in this war? They could have addressed that question easily.
During an attempt to take a Russian position, Wilhelm is knocked unconscious by an explosion from a rocket launcher. When he awakens, disoriented, he wanders off and ultimately takes shelter in the woods, disillusioned with the war. He actually finds his way to this little cute cabin with a cat. And I was like, please let him stay there for the rest of the series. Let him be a mountain man and just stay there and not be found. But obviously, he is found by military police, and he is actually sentenced to death for desertion, which I thought was pretty shocking. I thought he was actually gonna die, which, spoiler alert, he doesn't die.
Yeah, I feel like they did a good job of portraying this. When he first gets hit, he takes a real good bonk on the head, and then he's just wandering around. He hides out in a tank for a little while with a dying Russian, I think. It doesn't really seem to faze him. Then he wanders off into the woods, and you're like, okay, well, this is probably, he's not concussed anymore. He's just done. He's had some sense knocked into him. He's like, fuck this, I'm going into the forest.
Yeah, exactly. He's just running away from who he is, really. It's just like, I don't want to be a leader anymore. I don't want any part in this stupid war. I'm just going to live out my caveman fantasies and have a cat as a pet.
And this really, I think that also tells us about, because I mean, this whole time he's been the responsible one. He's the older brother, but we can't forget that he is also young. And I think like that decision is really indicative to me of that sort of mindset of just a young man being like, I don't know what to do. I'm at capacity. I don't have the bandwidth for this. I'm going to go off into the woods and hope for the best. And obviously, this is very wishful thinking. It's a complete fantasy to think that you could live out the war there and you wouldn't get caught and it wouldn't catch up with you. But that's what he thinks anyways.
I also really liked the scene where his former boss, I'm going to call him, I think his superior officer, comes in and tells him, I tried to get you a lighter sentence. I tried to tell them you have amnesia from the past, which that could have happened. That obviously didn't. But I did like that moment where the superior officer was actually concerned for him for once, instead of just a hard ass.
Yeah, and also the way he takes his death sentence is so calm.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, well, it's fine. And what he says, I think, is something along the lines is like, oh, well, the war's lost anyways, and one really has to decide for oneself. So either you die or you just keep lying to yourself. Yeah. Where, he says either you die or you lie, and I that's rhyme. But I interpret it as like, you keep lying to yourself. You're already dead, basically. And also just to go back a little bit, like when he's in that little cottage, I really like these voiceovers that they give, how Wilhelm narrates where they are in the course of the war. And when he talks about the reasons why you fight change over the course of the war. So in the beginning, you fight for your country, and later you fight for your comrades who you don't want to see dead. And then even later you ask, like, what do you fight for when there's no one left? And there's literally no one left around for you. And you can only lie to yourself. And that really goes back to what he then later says to the captain, I think it is, that, you can die, you can lie to yourself, but you're not going to win this war.
when he says you fight for your comrades, it's in stark comparison to what Friedhelm says to his fellow soldier in the telegram office, because he says, you hope the other guy gets it before you do.
I'd never made that connection, but you're right. Yes.
Yeah.
And also just in general, how Friedhelm is like treating the replacements, for example. He's like, oh, well, we're going to learn your names when you've survived 2 weeks. So for now, you're just going to be 1 and 2. He's like, oh, I don't really care who you are. You're just going to die anyways.
It reminds me vaguely of Band of Brothers.
Very vaguely, yes. I have no idea what you're referring to.
When they treat the replacements as like shit, basically. Just so that.
Yeah. I think worth mentioning also, I feel like perhaps audiences on my side of the world are not as familiar with the Eastern Front. And so this show really does give you this really grim portrayal of just how awful that sort of side of the war was, how, and I think people might not be as aware of it. I definitely wasn't.
Yeah, I also wasn't. So it's basically because the Netherlands has its own story to tell in the war. I don't think it was in our education at all. But maybe, Anna, for you it was different?
Well, it was sort of different because at least where I live, history of the Second World War is taught very delicately, let's say. So I wasn't taught any sort of battles or anything. I was taught then the war started at this date, and why did it start? What led to the start of the war? And then very roughly, we talked about the Eastern Front and the Western Front, allied nations, everything. But we never really delved into how brutal and how awful the battles really were. So yeah, we knew that the Eastern Front was a thing that existed, and they overran Poland, and then they were trying to overrun Russia and getting to Moscow. Yeah, we did learn about that, but we never really delved into the details of war. And I think that was very I think that was done on purpose, because I actually looked into the curriculum, or the history curriculum in my state, to see what is written there, how this should be taught, how history of the Second World War should be taught. And it states there, and that's really what I experienced, is that the teachers should not make it out like any of the victories were something good. So it wasn't portrayed as anything heroic. So we never really talked about the battle lasted this long and so many died.
Yeah.
So it was very, very broad and not really detail oriented.
I guess you really can't do it, because if you tell one side, you have to tell the other side, which is that Germany was not a popular country during the war, let's say.
I mean, we definitely talked about that. So it was made very clear from the very beginning that what the Germans did in World War II was absolutely wrong. And it was very we were on the losing side and we were on the wrong side. So that was never questioned at all.
Worth mentioning is that is somewhat of a novel approach, I would say, because American school kids aren't learning that the U.S. should not have gone into Vietnam. American school kids are not being taught, that the Americans were in the wrong about all of these international conflicts that they should never have been involved in. So I do think the German approach is almost unique in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, just to highlight how little we talked about specific battles, it sounds ridiculous, but before I got into history and World War II history and Band of Brothers specifically, I did not know that there were medics in the field. That never occurred to me. That for me, it was oh, you get shot, you're dead. It didn't occur to me that there were medics in the field saving lives of soldiers. I was confronted with that in Band of Brothers, where I was wait a minute. They don't just die. So yeah, we just did not talk about battles. Not at all.
Funny that, the idea that the show brings forth where soldiers are just cattle, that's what you thought was actually
exactly.
True.
That's what I thought war was like, that they just die, which is in hindsight is ridiculous, because you just don't die from everything. I mean, stupid, in the stupid 16-year-old Anna just didn't have the brain capacity to think for herself and say maybe that's not how this goes. This is not how death works. But yeah,
which I also think is interesting when you compare to like I would say the average, I wouldn't even just say like American school kid. I would say that it's true in Canada as well, is like very keen on like war movies and like probably would be able to tell you some nitty gritty about, specific battle things and stuff too. So even that is like a contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know how other states, like every German state has a different curriculums and a different sort of school system, how they approach topics. So I don't know how other states might have taught history, but for me at least it was like that.
I think it won't be that different from what you've experienced. I can't imagine it being like really, really different.
No, I can't imagine either. I think they try to stay as broadly on the topic as possible without like giving too many details. And really it focused more on the why and how, or more on the why the war happened and what went wrong politically and how the German population basically was brainwashed into believing everything that Hitler said.
Yeah.
And then also like after the war, like how this brainwashing had to be redone or undone rather. Of course, we learned a lot about the Holocaust and like Jewish ghettos and everything. That was basically, I think, the main point in our education on World War II.
Right. So Friedhelm believes his brother has died. He saw Wilhelm take that big old bonk on the head and, didn't see him after that. So he thinks he's been killed. And he ends up, in order to get out of the situation, because they've been overrun by the Russians, he puts on a Russian uniform to try and escape. But his own men shoot him because they see him from far away and they think that he's a Russian. So they shoot him right through the heart. So you think things are probably not looking good for him.
Yeah, I was pretty brutal in our messenger chat about this because I quoted a Bon Jovi song as this was happening to figure out which one I think.
I mean, I was sure he was dead when I first watched it. I was like, there's no way.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's like so many instances where you're saying, oh, he's a goner. He's definitely a goner. And then he's not.
Even the show itself makes a little note of that. Not actually with Friedhelm, but with Wilhelm when the guy ends up asking him, how many lives have you got? He's like, just got one left.
Yeah.
But yeah, so even the show itself realizes that they're giving these guys a lot of leeway.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, you need at least some of the main characters to survive until the end, I'd say.
Yes.
And I think killing someone at roughly the middle of the second episode is just stylistically from a like narrative point of view is like not the best.
Yeah, it's
too soon, definitely. Okay, so we continue on with Charlotte, and after being shot in this attempt to go back to his company, Friedhelm is shot, and he's brought to the hospital, to the field hospital, where Charlotte finds him and convinces the surgeon, Dr. Jahn, who is portrayed by Götz Schubert, to operate on him, even though he's close to death, on the brink of death, basically, and Dr. Jahn has given up on him. Friedhelm survives, and he tells Charlotte and Greta, who's still there, that Wilhelm was killed by the mortar round in the attack at Kursk. And Charlotte is absolutely distraught by this and begins an affair with the surgeon, Dr. Jahn, who is considerably older than her. I'm actually like curious to see why you think she started this affair, but I'm going to finish this up. So Friedhelm returns home, actually back to Berlin on leave, and meets his parents, and his mother is very happy to see him, but his father is absolutely disappointed that Friedhelm is the one to survive and not Wilhelm. And as a result of this absolutely horrible greeting by his father, Friedhelm decides to go back to the front. His unit does not exist anymore because everyone is dead.
I do wonder if his outlook on life seems to be influenced by what his father thinks of him as well. You can tell that when he goes back, he doesn't care about living at all.
Oh, he doesn't. And he says also like, I'm sad it wasn't a centimeter to the left. So the heart would actually been hit directly and then he would have died.
Yeah, a real contrast between, because we obviously also see Victor's parents and, the immense love and grief that Victor's father feels when he leaves, and then sort of contrasted to this homecoming for Friedhelm that's decidedly lukewarm.
Yeah. I feel bad for his mother. His mother seems really upset when he leaves again.
Understandably so, because she thinks one of her sons is dead and the other is basically walking towards death again. I think I'd be quite distraught too if I were in that situation. We also meet in Berlin when Friedhelm is there. We also meet some very eager Hitler youth, actually, in the pub, who really, really bother him and want him to talk about all the heroic actions of the war. And Friedhelm obviously does not want to talk about that, which is understandable. And the Hitler Youth boys, they grow quite resentful towards him.
Yeah.
And they accuse him of he feels he's too good to talk to them, like he's superior to them. But actually, I think Friedhelm is just so over the war by now that he just really doesn't want to talk about it.
It's almost a reflection of what happens in the beginning when he's hated for an entirely different reason, for not being a good soldier.
Yeah.
Now he's similarly hated, but for not wanting to talk about the war and not being proud of what he's done.
Not being actually a good soldier, yeah. I think there's like this juxtaposition or comparison of these very inexperienced boys, these future soldiers, and then the opposition of the bleak outlook of the war veteran. I was like, and they are so up for it, and they are so excited about not much longer, and we'll be in the trenches, and we'll go to war and kill people. And that really shows how brainwashed the Hitler Youth really was, because they were made to believe that this is like the ultimate thing for them to do and the greatest honor to go to war. And then they meet this war veteran who is just so done with everything and who has seen war and seen how awful it really is.
Yeah.
This theme too is almost sort of foreshadowing for the scene that, of course, we'll talk about later, where he is with a unit of very, very young boys towards the end of the war, like one of them's 12, and he ends up having to sacrifice himself so that they can see like what it really is, and to understand that your life isn't something you can just throw away. This is the reality of the situation.
Yeah. You asked, Anna, you want to know why we think Charlie or Charlotte having an affair with Dr. Jan?
Yeah, I was really conflicted about that. Because I think, on the one hand, she's just trying to find solace.
I just think she is being a little rebel. At this point, she's done everything she's supposed to do, and so the love of her life, she thinks, is dead. She's upset, and she just wants to feel something that's not heartbreak. I think that's it.
I think part of it also might be that, as you know, now that Wilhelm's been killed, the unthinkable has happened. The hopelessness of the situation starts to sink in, and it becomes like, well, like if he's dead, and the way the war is going, like we're probably all going the same way. You know what? Fuck it.
I'm just gonna check up with that old dude.
Yeah, I mean, he's around, first of all. And he obviously saved Friedhelm. He's like a competent guy. So she's like, well,
he doesn't treat her poorly, I guess, also. So at least.
Yeah, he's a decent guy. He's
old though, let's be
He's
fair.
old though, yes, but he's a decent guy, and he could give like a future, actually. If they all survive the war, then she could have a decent future with him.
Yeah. Victor has been sent to Auschwitz on a train, but he manages to escape from the train with a fellow prisoner, Alina, played by Alina Levshin. They go on a run and end up in the company of Polish partisans, where he must hide the fact that he's Jewish because they hate Jewish people, these particular ones, and this is one of the main criticisms, I think, of the show. Anna, I think you looked into this.
Yes, that was a very big point of criticism around the world, actually. So I looked into the reception of the series a bit, and of course it was first released in Germany, but then it was also released in Poland and in the US and in Russia also, and basically everyone criticized the way the Polish partisans were portrayed, both in media and in politics, actually. They were very unhappy with the almost exclusively anti-Semitic portrayal of the partisans, and a Polish politician actually told the cabinet that the series should have never been shown in Poland, and that it portrays the Wehrmacht as heroic benefactors, and the whole of the home army was portrayed as dirty, brutal, and shabby and anti-Semites. And I can absolutely understand why this is a major point of criticism of the series, because that is what happened. I think the Polish partisans were portrayed very unkindly and also wrongly, I think, just because there were later voices spoke up that, that's really not how the partisans really were. I mean, some might have been anti-Semitic, but there were also a lot of partisan groups who helped Jewish refugees in the underground. And starting in 1942, there were rescue and support missions of these partisan groups for Jewish Germans to flee Germany. And also in Russia and the US, the criticism surrounded the fact that the series was trivializing the Nazi crimes. And the Polish population in the series, both partisans and also civilians, were portrayed as rural, simple-minded and primitive. And they were portrayed as the only real dedicated and aggressive anti-Semites in the war, as opposed to the Germans who weren't really that bothered with the Jews. So all the main characters, they were like, oh yeah, they're still friends with the Jewish person, a Jewish man, and they're trying to help him flee the country. And I can absolutely understand why people took offense to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The show kind of chose to make all the evil kind of other, like the Ukrainian auxiliary police and the Polish people. And I don't know, it's a choice. I understand part of it, but I also understand the criticism, and I think I agree with that.
Yeah. And it's actually a choice that didn't have to be made. So I think the show would have still been very good if, for example, they'd have shown a partisan group trying to help Victor flee. Like showing these support missions of these Polish partisans would have been just as exciting to watch than the like rough anti-Semite
It's not
trying
like-
to rob a train. Yeah.
It's not like Victor's not been through enough already.
Yeah. Yeah. Just give him a break and have someone help him for once. And the producer, Nico Hoffman, I read that he actually apologized for the fact that apparently so many people in Poland felt slighted by the series. And he said that it was never his intention for the series to distract from the fault of the Germans of the war and the Holocaust. And he also apologized for, and this is, I absolutely do not understand why this actually happened. He apologized for the fact that no Polish historian had ever been asked to help with developing the series. So I just don't understand why they wouldn't consult Polish historians if they are portraying Polish history. Like I just don't understand. This is just stupid to me.
It's funny because it really is, it's of course much easier to, as you said, I'm sure there were partisan groups who were anti-Semitic, but it's much easier to point the finger at someone else. And they really hit that note hard. I mean, the partisans are very anti-Semitic. Then, it's much easier to do that than it is to be self-reflective and sort of point that same finger at your own country. And that's, of course, what we see in the show. The most virulent anti-Semitism in some ways comes from these partisans, and our main characters get the opportunity to really soft pedal it. It's much more nuanced. Charlotta reports someone, but then she regrets it and that sort of thing.
But for some reason, you still want to root for all of them. I don't know how you guys felt about that.
Well, everyone except Greta. I still don't like her, but yeah. I definitely want Wilhelm and Friedhelm to survive. Like, even though I know they've done horrible things, I still hope that they're surviving the war. I still want Charlotte to make it out alive. I definitely want Victor to make it out alive because he's the victim, the most victimiest of victims in all of this. And yeah, I understand, like they're trying to whitewash really what is happening, the fault of the main characters. They're pushing it down. It's like, oh, it's not so bad what they're doing because the partisans, they are so bad.
And also because they are also just victims, like our main characters are victims.
Yeah.
So even though they've done bad things, we're also supposed to feel sorry for them, which I do, but also
I don't. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do. Yeah, but I also don't. I don't. So, but then again, it's hindsight, and we know we're watching this from the 2024 perspective. 2 Polish Home Army soldiers actually sued the production company after it was shown because they sued the company for compensation because of the anti-Semitic portrayal of the partisans. They didn't win because the production company, which actually it's the ZDF, it's second German television, which is national broadcasting company. It's very big. And they produced the series, and they noted that as a work of art and fiction, they actually had the freedom to change the narrative to make it work for their cause. So that's why they didn't win the 2 retired army soldiers. They didn't win this
lawsuit.
Exactly. Yeah, which is just, I mean, yes, creative license is everything in art, in media, but I think there's a limit to it.
Also, it's like you said earlier, it's just unnecessary to do it like this.
Yeah, because exactly, it's unnecessary because there could have been just as exciting and interesting storylines that would have portrayed the partisans in a more truthful way.
Greta returns to Germany from her big tour and her time spent helping Charlotte at the hospital. And she's also becoming disillusioned. And she makes a remark to a group of soldiers that the final victory has been canceled, which one of them reports to the Gestapo. She's also fed up with Dorn at this point. He's shipped her out on this tour to get rid of her. That's the impression that we get, anyways. And she calls his wife at home to tell her about the affair that they've been having. And these things combined cause her to be arrested. Dorn is not very happy about this. And she tells him that she's pregnant. And in another moment of shocking violence in a series that's full of them, he punches her in the stomach to cause her to miscarry. It's very brutal.
Yeah, this was hard to watch, even for a character you don't like.
Yes, definitely. And I think she has a bit of redeeming arc by saying like, oh yeah, the victory is probably not gonna happen. And she also says to these soldiers who appear to not have been at the front lines, if you want to experience war, you should probably hurry up because it's not gonna last too much longer. And yeah, we're gonna lose anyways. I felt a bit more for her now that she's actually experienced the war and seen how horrible it is, and she's not as naive and stupid as she was in the beginning. So seeing her arrested for something, I think later they're saying she's arrested for defeatism. So already feeling defeat, which is just a stupid reason to be arrested, I think. And then for Dawn to just hit her and have her lose her child, even though I don't, maybe she really just said she was pregnant.
Yeah,
to get out of it.
Well. Yeah.
But we don't know that. And I mean, I don't want to accuse her of lying about these things. But even, just hitting her was just awful to watch. And that is, I think, the end of episode 2.
In part 3 of this series, A Different Country or Ein anderes Land, we start in 1944 and the Red Army inches toward Berlin. Rome has fallen, as it did in real life, and the Americans and Brits have landed in Normandy. We only get told this, we don't see any of it. We pick up on Wilhelm and Greta in prison. Charlotte is at the field hospital greeting over Wilhelm's death. Even though he's not dead, she still thinks he's dead. And Victor is taking part in ambushes with the party's partisans, because they don't know he's Jewish. Wilhelm's narration grows increasingly grim and aware of the situation.
Yeah. In the narration, there's a few lines that just makes you go like, oof. Like there was one where he says, the only beneficiary of war is the flies.
Yeah.
That one really got me too.
Yeah.
It's very well written. It's very quotable, let's say it like that.
Yeah.
And deep. But yeah.
There's a good quote here. Soon there will be no Nazis left, only Germans. And I thought this specific quote was really hard-hitting at this point of this show. That kind of shut me up for a bit. So,
I mean, he's right. After the war, no one was a Nazi. No one knew what was happening. I never believed in that. That was the common trend of how people thought in the end to get out of it. Because then no one ever was a Nazi. And also, I think that in Band of Brothers, in the last 2 episodes, that's quite well portrayed with the baker who doesn't know what is going on, literally like a mile away from his home, and he's never been a Nazi. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't know if he actually understood what he was saying in that scene because he's speaking German, but I don't remember if there were subtitles or not. But
I think there are subtitles for that. I also don't believe.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. He knows exactly what's happening, as does everyone in that town. Everyone was saying, "No, I'm not a Nazi. I never knew what was happening." To get out of it, to not face the facts and face punishment for what has happened and what they did, even if just passively. I mean, you could be a party member and not do anything, but you're still going along with what the party wants.
Yeah. I read a book recently where I believe it was a Women's Army Corps soldier was taking the train in France, maybe, and then it passed through Germany, and this was right at the end of the war. Like the war had just ended. And she was describing, they were passing through these German cities that had just been absolutely destroyed by bombing from the Allies. And poor German people would approach the train and they were like yelling things. And she was like, what are they saying? And someone told her they're saying, we're not Nazis, we're not Nazis, and like begging for food and shouting that they're not Nazis.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a very difficult thing to talk about because there's also this why. I mean, like I said, just because you're not committing war crimes doesn't mean you're not a Nazi. But also being in a Nazi party doesn't necessarily mean you believed everything, what they were saying and what they were standing for. Like, I know that there's people who were members of the party just to keep their property. Because in my family, that happened. They were landowners, and in order to keep their farm and their land, they were members of the party, just to be left alone. So that's what they're saying. I don't know 100% if that's the truth, and I don't want to talk badly about people and accuse them of anything other than what they've told me or members of my family. But
Yeah.
it's a very delicate line.
We've talked about this very briefly before on another episode, where sometimes the reasons for joining a party like that aren't the ideologies as much as the opportunities they give you or
Yes,
the sense of hope.
that's very well said. Thank you. That's basically what I was trying to say in my very bumbling way.
I do want to say that I can understand those reasons to join the party, but I cannot understand those reasons to stay within the party once you knew what they were doing. Joining, I can understand. Staying is another matter altogether.
Yeah, but then again, it's also like, what happens if you leave the party? What happens to you then? So yeah, I understand what you mean, but also understand that it would have been very hard to live in Nazi Germany being known as someone who has left the party.
Well, and you also, at a certain point, you start to justify it to yourself, right? You're like, well, I've come this far and I'm not directly involved in what's happening. And you start to tell yourself all the reasons why what you're doing is fine. I mean, a lot of people do that in a lot of situations. And I think it's definitely worth talking about that oftentimes, like, that's how banal it was. You don't have to be a frothing anti-Semite to have supported the infrastructure of the Holocaust. A lot of people were just in it because it made things better for them and their families.
That's very true, yes.
And it's also like Sam said at the very beginning, it's very difficult to do something about your situation, whatever it is, whether you're in the party or you're having to escape your country. Either of those things are difficult to change, to make that decision, to make it is really difficult.
Yeah, it takes a tremendous amount of strength and conviction to do that. And let's face it, probably most of the people do not have that.
No, true. We've also discussed this before, where I don't know what choice I would make if I could keep my family safe in one way over another, where I would do maybe not the best of things.
Exactly. We can say a lot of things now without being in that situation and saying, oh, I would never do that. But being put in that situation, how would you react? We don't know that because we're not in that situation.
Friedhelm, who's now a driver for Sturmbannführer Heimer, played by Sylvester Groth, and that is the man who executed the little girl in front of him in the first episode. He recognizes Victor disguised at a checkpoint. So, of course, Victor is participating in these ambushes with the partisans. They're trying to kill Nazis. And so Victor is pretending to be a German soldier. Friedhelm recognizes him, and he manages to avoid driving Heimer into one of the partisan ambushes. And Heimer then tells him that his brother Wilhelm is actually alive, but unfortunately he's in prison for desertion.
Yeah. What an awful man, this Mr. Heimer.
Oof. Yeah, not a good dude, for sure. Definitely one of the more stark, obvious evil Nazis in the series.
Yeah, fantastically portrayed by Sylvester Groth. He's just a fantastic actor.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen, what's it called? Codename Uncle with Henry Cavill. It's a Cold War. Yeah, the man from Uncle. Yeah, in German it's called Codename Uncle. The man from Uncle. And he's actually he plays the uncle of the girl whose name I forgot. Get fried in the chair accidentally. I think to portray these awful people, you have to be very cool to believably portray these men. Very talented. Yeah, what did you think about this? Seeing Victor and Friedhelm meeting again in a way.
I mean, you definitely in real time watch Friedhelm like make the decision to save Hemer because he didn't have to, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting one for sure. A complex character choice.
I also wondered, like, is he saving Hemer? Is he also saving himself? And does he want to live, or does he just not care anymore? It's, I don't know, his motivations in this part of the show are a bit
Questionable.
more-
Yeah.
they're questionable, but also unclear. Like, you can't really tell what's going on inside his head anymore.
To me, it was like, oh, he's gone full on bad now. He's saving the bad guy. He's one of them now. He's lost all of his humanity that we still saw a few times in the other episodes, even after he's become like the capable soldier. But like sometimes you still saw like little glimpses of his soul, I think.
Okay.
But in that moment, I was like, oh no, he's gone. He's absolutely like, he's lost it now.
I think Wilhelm dying, or at least him thinking he died, has made him lose all his humanity.
Yeah.
Like, the last good part of him died when he thought Wilhelm died.
Yeah, I think so too. That was the moment where he's just completely left his humanity behind. But on the other hand, you still see like these small glimpses, even in like the third episode, where he's like just trying to leave all of this behind, like the war behind, like when he goes into the forest and just sits like leaning against the tree when this like dog/wolf, I don't know, comes and growls at him. And I think he's just trying to escape, and you still see like, oh, maybe something is still in him that is worth redeeming.
I wonder what that scene meant. I was thinking about it, but I couldn't really figure it out.
No, me neither. Yeah, I don't know. We don't know. This is something sometimes we don't have to know everything.
Listen, we can't know them all.
So Wilhelm's death sentence actually has been commuted, and he's sent instead to a penal battalion for deserters. And he rightly guesses that this is because the Reich, in its death throes, can't really afford to lose any more men. His superior is a very awful man called Krebs. He's a Oberfeldwebel, which is basically a sergeant major, so not even an officer. And he directly disobeys orders several times, refusing to participate in further death and destruction, and that culminates in him killing his tyrannical sergeant major and then escaping to freedom.
Yeah.
How sad was that scene where he's supposed to burn down this farm, and then he enters the house and there's just this cute little old couple. Oh God.
Oh my God, yeah. Wow, yeah, that was a lot.
And they're so nice and welcoming him, and like you said, they're offering him tea, and then we don't know if do we know if he burns down the house?
He doesn't.
No, he doesn't. Right? And as he's getting, beat up by the sergeant over it, someone else shows up and is like, actually, we've been ordered not to set any more fires because
right.
the Russians where we are and that kind of stuff.
Right. See, I forgot that.
But they're still alive. That's good.
They're still alive, yes.
Yeah, for now.
And then he ends up killing the guy.
With a knife.
With a knife.
Yeah. I was happy about that. That was one of the nicer moments in the series.
Yeah. And I also thought it was interesting we get to hear, I think, the partisans trying to convince German soldiers to come to their side.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
that broadcast, yes. I didn't know that was happening.
No, but I bet it did. I also didn't know there were like these penal battalions like this. It's interesting to see.
Yeah, just these, like, basically these prisoners being forced to work and
and clean up the bodies and stuff like that. It reminded me a little bit of the grave digger crews in the US forces, but they were not being punished. But these guys obviously did the same kind of job.
Yeah,
yes,
I mean, someone has to do it.
Yes, but not with the same level. Like in the Americans, for example, they had these grave registration units, and these guys would literally like choose a spot, design a cemetery, bury the bodies, mark the bodies. Like it was all very orderly. And you get the impression at this point in the war, Wilhelm and his buddy are just throwing bodies in a cart. You're like, this is not the orderly burial of a war that's going well. It's kind of like, well, here's some bodies. We better clean them up and get rid of them.
Yeah.
And it's also like, it's just swampy like areas. It's not a nice area to work in, I think. I mean, it's not intended to be nice because they're still in a penal battalion, but yeah, I wouldn't want to be him.
I also already forgot the name of his friend on the battalion.
Oh, his name is Caro.
I'm not gonna
I
repeat
just
that.
read this in my notes. I did not remember either. Because I also, there's so many people, like, and they're all dirty and in helmets. It's hard to distinguish them.
Oh yeah, in war media, we always say they all suffer from all these white guys look the same.
That's very true.
Victor proves himself to the partisans, but they discover that he is Jewish when he frees a train full of Jewish prisoners. The leader, Jersey, played by Lucas Gregorowicz, lets him go rather than killing him, so he's showing him mercy. But Victor returns when he hears that the partisans, including his friend Alina, are being attacked by German soldiers. And that's when he comes face to face with Friedhelm, who saves his life and kills Heimer. And then Victor gets to escape. The little face-off they have was difficult to watch. I thought they no longer recognized each other as friends in this scene, or at the very least, Friedhelm seemed kind of apprehensive about it. He was just like, just get out of here while you still can. I wondered why doesn't he just go with him?
I think in his mind, and I mean, I could be wrong about this, but I think like Friedhelm was just at a point where like in his mind, he's not making it out of this. He's like, there's no way that I survived the war. He's very like fatalistic. He's nihilistic. He doesn't believe in anything anymore. And so for him, he's like, well, like I might as well stick it out now.
Yeah, and he's basically a dead man walking, and he doesn't want to pull Victor along with his fate, I think. Yeah. And I was like, Matt, you were saying you were thinking that Friedhelm is the more apprehensive one. I was actually thinking that Victor was the one who is like coming face to face with someone who's now the enemy, because what he's seen before with Friedhelm is he's actually like with Heimer. And he saved Heimer. So now his friend has become someone who persecutes him.
Yeah.
But then he sees like Friedhelm killing Heimer and actually letting him go and giving him a chance to survive. I think that redeems him a bit in his eyes.
Yeah, because he did think he was going to shoot him, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a real moment of truth for Victor and us as the audience, because we also didn't know what Friedhelm was going to do in that situation.
Exactly, yeah.
Charlotta has begun to spend time with a Russian nurse named Sonia, who tells her that when the Russians do arrive, she's going to be shot as a traitor. And Charlotta is at a point where she's deliberately hurting wounded soldiers so that they will not be forced to return to the front line. And she is briefly reunited with Wilhelm when his penal battalion shows up outside the hospital, but she has a breakdown because, of course, she thought he was dead.
I think it's so cool. I think it's so cool that Charlotte, who in the beginning was so like by the books and so perfectionist, and then she's starting to be this little rebel who is like inflicting injuries on the wounded soldiers to keep them there and not make them go back to the front line. It's so cool.
Yeah.
She also tells Wilhelm that she loves him, and then she runs away. And when she comes back, he's gone.
Yeah, that was sad. That was really sad. Like she had this breakdown, and then she had to compose herself again to then face him again, and then he's gone again. Seriously, just let them be happy for 1 second.
And we do know at this point that he feels the same way about her, but he hasn't wanted to tell her because he doesn't want to give her false hope of, like him surviving the war.
Yeah, it's rough, man, being this young and being in love and being in war.
It's just rough being in love. Okay, so as the Germans flee the Russian advance, Charlotte remains behind to try and help Sonia. And the Russian soldiers come in and kill the remaining German wounded in the field hospital. One of them actually attacks Charlotte, who is then rescued by Lilia. Surprise, surprise, she's not dead. Who is now a Soviet officer, actually. And Charlotte witnesses Sonia's execution by Lilia. And then Lilia makes Charlotte help the Soviets as a nurse. And yeah, they have a little talk about why Lilia killed Sonia or executed her.
Yeah, it's interesting because, Sonia and Charlotta were doing the same thing. They were nurses, but in Lilia's eyes, it was unforgivable that Sonia was helping, like German wounded, basically. Like she's a traitor. And they also, I thought it was interesting too, Charlotta asked Lilia, like, why are you helping me? And she says, because if I don't, this will never stop. Like this back and forth, like people, I'll hurt you because you hurt me kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah. Also, I didn't get that from watching it, but I read it on the Wikipedia page. that Lilia actually executes Sonia to spare her the horrors and torture of the soldiers before she was inevitably executed anyways. So basically she's helping her die quicker by an execution at her hands than torture and possibly rape before execution at the hands of the soldiers, which I didn't get from just watching the series. To me, it was like, oh yeah, she killed her because she saw Sonia as a traitor.
Yeah. And when Lilia saves Charlotta, she is being raped by a Russian soldier, and
This is the scene. This is the scene.
I hated it. I was glad that they included it because rape is often a weapon of war, and everyone was doing it. The Soviets did it, the Germans did it, the Americans did it. You know, this was an issue with with armies in World War II and throughout history. And so I was glad that they included it. I thought it was important, but like, man, I hated watching it.
Yeah,
absolutely. It was awful to watch. But also, like you said, this definitely happened, but also it's such a stereotype. Like, oh, the Russians came and raped all the women. I mean, yes, it did happen, but it's also, by now, it's always portrayed that way. It's, I think, become a stereotype of the Russians' advancement towards Germany. Like, they came, plundered, and raped.
But also, and this is actually the part where I read in your note, like you believe that Lilia was the spy in the hospital that stole the morphine and stuff. And I wasn't so sure she was. So that's
I did think that from the beginning, and then I read up on Wikipedia about her, and it actually states that she was infiltrating the field hospital to get morphine for the Soviets. It's never stated that she actually was the one. That to me, it was just the feeling like, they made her out to be this, but
it's not super obvious.
It's absolutely not obvious, no.
Right. As the war nears its end in the spring of 1945, someone says the war is almost over. This is pointless. And then Friedhelm says, it was always pointless, which was pretty true to character if you follow his storyline. He sacrifices his life so that the Volksstrom group he is leading will be persuaded to surrender peacefully to the Russians. This was so hard to watch for me. I was like, don't do it. Just lay down your weapons and surrender. But
yeah, it was really hard to watch. For one, children in the war, like 12-year-olds. Yeah. So eager. And we still have ammunition. We are gonna fight until the last bullet. Then this old man who was pulled into war because like they need everyone. So old men and children, who's so done with this situation. And then the scene where Friedhelm writes something on the back of the picture and then gives it to the old man and says, like, make sure the people get it, that it's addressed to. And you're just like, oh, seriously? Like, just surrender and you can be back with your friends. But also, like, I sort of understand why he did it, because he was done by that time. Like, and he could use his death as, like, it was useful.
Yeah.
Dying like that.
It feels inevitable to him and us as the audience that it was going to end this way for him one way or the other.
Yep.
Yeah, and by killing, by basically running towards death and then in the end dying, it did make the others surrender and save their lives, possibly.
Yeah.
So it was meaningful and useful in the end. So he did something that was right.
Yes. Greta does not escape the death throes of the Third Reich. She is executed by firing squad on the vindictive orders of Dorn, who saves his own skin. At first, you think that he's going to kill himself and his family to escape retribution for what happened during the war, but he decides not to, and it turns out that he was right because he burns his uniform and volunteers his bureaucratic expertise to the new regime. And so now he has a desk job. And right before her death, Greta actually tells Dorn that she's happy that Victor is somewhere safe without her, because she doesn't know that Victor got picked up. She thinks that Dorn was true to his word and that Victor escaped to France. And Dorn is obviously trying to save his own skin at this point. He's got paperwork that he wants her to sign saying, like, look, I arranged papers for your friend. I helped, you know? And she refuses to sign those papers. And ultimately, Victor, who has survived, learns about her death and the loss of his parents in bombed out Berlin. And the city is just absolutely in shambles. It's barely recognizable.
Yeah. The lady in the house, in his house, that just made me so angry.
Yeah. Oh, well, I never had anything against them. That's like I said earlier, like, there's only Germans, no Nazis. So
Yeah.
I didn't mind them, and we could at least
only
use
ever
their furniture.
Yeah, and she also says, I only ever tried to help them. I'm like,
Yeah.
bitch, how?
Yeah, bitch, you
What
did
did
not.
We should just sort of briefly explain if someone hasn't seen it. There's like a woman living in the apartment where Victor's parents lived. And Greta goes there at one point to check on Victor's parents, and they're not there. And this woman's very like confrontational and hostile about Jewish people. And then when Victor goes back at the end of the war, he sees her again, and all of a sudden her tune's changed. You know, she's like, "Oh, I tried to help them, etc."
Yeah, we're nearing the end of the series. So Charlotte, Wilhelm, and Victor have survived, and they meet in the pub where they had met 4 years ago. And it's very clear that they have no idea how to put the pieces back together. They have changed beyond recognition almost, and still they meet again, and they drink to the lives of Friedhelm and Greta. And then we see a flashback back to the very beginning where they meet before everything goes to shit, basically. And that's so sad.
Yes.
I agree. Hard to watch.
Very hard to watch. This immediate comparison to the three of them just so done with everything. And the colors are so dark and so gray, and there's almost no color left. And then we switch back to the beginning where it's so deeply saturated and everything's so bright and happy. Like stylistically, that is fantastic. We've done it.
We've done it.
We have. Did we decide what we're going to rate this? I don't remember.
We were gonna do something funny, but I feel like I suggested something funny before I watched the show, and now I don't feel like we can be funny.
No, it's far too grim.
We're so sad now.
I don't know. What can we rate it out of 10?
7 out of 10 lives that we still have left.
Yeah, good one.
Right. So who wants to go first in rating this movie? Not me.
Well, I'll go first. Yeah, I really liked it. It was hard to watch in places, but sometimes that's necessary. And I definitely would recommend it to other people who haven't seen it. It really sucks you in. I thought the story was well told. I understood why there was controversy, of course, some of which we touched on. So obviously not perfect, but overall, I would give it 8 lives that we still have left out of 10.
I'll go next because I know I've seen it before, but I also saw this for the first time. I'm gonna rate it 8.5 lives out of 10 we still have left. It was one of my favorite things I've seen this year, as I said in the beginning, or in episode 1 of this podcast. It's sad, it's very dark, but it's so well acted, and the storytelling is brilliant, and it's entirely character-driven, which I love. There's no nonsense whatsoever in the show. Everything is good, basically, despite the points of criticism we've already mentioned. And I would definitely actually watch it again, even though it's so dark. So that's it for me. And that's all that's left now is Anna. Anna, what do you rate this series?
Oh, wow. Well, I think it is a fantastic show. It is really well acted, really well produced. Stylistically, it's wonderful to look at. It's rough, man. It's really hard to watch, though. It hurts watching it because it's so sad at times, and just seeing like these characters losing their innocence and their hope just really hurts on a different level. Still, because of these points of criticism or plot points that caused the criticism that I think could have been handled differently and still would have made a great show, I think I would give it 7.5 lives that I still have left.
Not bad. That's a good rating overall.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great show, and I can understand why some people compared it to Band of Brothers. I mean, it is stylistically in some parts quite similar.
Yeah.
Also, like the way it's shot with the shaky camera, the point of view, the very vivid portrayal of battles, the voiceover in some parts, that was very well done. And how beautiful is this soundtrack? I don't know if you've like really paid attention to it, but it's so beautiful.
Yeah. And for this particular podcast as well, we're always happy when we see women in war media who aren't hat racks. And for better or worse, 2 of our main characters are women, and they do have, significant plot lines and emotional arcs. So I did really appreciate that about the show. And I personally hadn't seen anything, I don't think, from the German perspective before. So I also enjoyed that piece as well.
Yeah, I don't think there's too many films or series that really delve into the German perspective of the war, other than maybe, I don't know, Schindler's List or these other series that really focus on the Holocaust. But the regular German soldier, the Wehrmacht, is not really something that is portrayed too often. I'd recommend Das Boot if you haven't watched it yet. That is a very, very good representation also of the regular soldier.
It's on our list.
It's long and it's really hard hitting, but it's fantastic. I've not watched the series, but I've watched the movie, and it took me I think it's a 3.5-hour movie, and it took me about 5 hours because I had to take breaks and just go back and stuff.
But normally we talk about what we're reading, but we just recorded yesterday, so I'm assuming that Mart and I don't have anything new to add on that front. So Anna, are you currently reading anything, or do you want to recommend maybe any books on this topic?
Oh, books on the topic I don't really know, because that's not something this perspective isn't really what I usually read. What I'm actually currently reading is Pride and Prejudice because I needed something light and cute for change.
After this show, like a little palate cleanser.
Yeah. But yeah, other than that, I don't know. There's
You don't have
probably
to.
so many books, but I can't think of any at the top of my head right now.
That's okay. No worries. Just figured if you had any.
If you want to
Alright.
watch anything about the resistance and actually how there was to German resistance, I mean, there's always Sophie Scholl, The White Rose, and there's a movie called, I think, The Last Stand or something. Sophie Scholl, The Last Stand from 2004, 2005 was actually nominated for an Academy Award. It's a fantastic movie. I don't know if it's translated or subbed or anything, but that's really great. And it really shows how very young people went to very great lengths to resist the Nazi regime.
That's cool. I also want to quickly mention that if you live in the US, you can watch Generation War on Amazon Prime, which you cannot do in the Netherlands, but if you're really smart, you can.
Well, thanks so much for being on our podcast, Anna. We'll probably have to have you on again at some point. I feel like that conversation was really good and you made us sound smart. So I always appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
You can find us wherever you get your podcast. Please follow us and rate us 5 stars. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast, or you can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com. Forgot what I was saying. Halfway through that sentence. Anyways.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anna. And see you next week, everybody else.
You're
Bye.
so welcome. It was great to be here, and hopefully see you guys soon.